Alright, so we're going to try this again. This is a video part 2 of 3, wherein I will tell you how to avoid second sock syndrome by using the magic loop method of making socks. We'll also be doing this toe up and demonstrating Judy's magic cast on with 2 separate skeins. So, I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible. I just want to show what I wasn't able to get into the first video that I recorded this morning. And we'll cover a few things that are in the outline. So, like I said, this is toe up socks, 2 at a time, magic loop. And with Judy's magic cast on, this is not a sock pattern. I am not going to walk you through the entirety of creating a sock. I just want to show you how to do the cast on and the order in which to do the stitches and all of that. So the reason to use this is because you can make 2 socks at the same time with 2 50-gram balls. As I mentioned in the part 1 video, sock yarn comes in either 100 grams or usually 50 grams. So if you get a 50-gram ball, make sure that you have 2. So always read your labels. And if you'd like to see other reasons why I like this technique, you can check out the first video. What you will need is a circular needle with a flexible cable. It can be a fixed circular like this, or it can be an interchangeable. You just need at least 32 inches. 36 is really common, but 40 is what most directions will suggest. These are Lykkes needles. I've linked to them below. I also like knit picks. You'll see those in my 3rd video, and with links to those there. And then there are other ones like Knitter's Pride or Addis, but I have not used either of those, so I can't vouch for their efficacy or durability. One of the good things about these and the knit picks is if they break, those companies are really, really good about replacing them. And it does happen, and it's not a big deal, and you're not defective. It is just the nature of the product. Now, as I said, I wouldn't go any smaller than 32 inches. I tried to do some magic loop with 24. That did not work out for me. So there we go. And then, of course, you need yarn. Now, these are just what you need to start casting on. This doesn't include any other materials, tools, or notions that you need for your actual pattern, which is where you would find that information. And I do link to a pattern that I've used several times and I really like below, so you can get that if you want. And I've tested it, and I took a class around it, and I love the designer, so it's worth investing in if you want to get into making socks toe up. So other considerations before we get started is no matter whether you use 2 skeins or 1, you have to make sure not to tangle your strands. And what you will do is to not have this happen, you will just switch the position of your skeins. And you just want the correct strand hanging from your needles on the correct side. Now, if you forget, if you mean to and it doesn't happen, just put your knitting down, fix your strands, and it's fine. It's not the end of the world if you don't. But when you turn them, do make sure that you keep turning them the same direction, because otherwise you're going to tangle it that way as well. Now, a few last things. Whenever I work from a set of skeins, I like to work from the center. That is my preference. And until you get to the very end, it's not really a big deal. And when you get to the end, you'll have this outer layer here, and it'll kind of collapse on itself. But you have so little yarn left at that point that I don't find it to be a nuisance. You can, of course, work from the outside of the skein. However, if you do that, you do need to make sure that you still have care and you don't have them rolling around. Let's see. I'm trying to find my place. The other thing, and this is not going to be happening here, but when you're choosing the needles or the yarn, consider the contrast between the colors. If you have eyesight problems, or if you're working where the light isn't the greatest, having more contrast between the color of the needle and the color of the yarn will be helpful. I make some suggestions when it comes to the knit picks versions in my 3rd video, so you'll hear more about that there. But me personally, I can see well enough with these that it's not a big deal and I don't worry about it. But if that's something that concerns you with small needles and small yarn, it's worth considering using a lighter a lighter color. A good lighter color option would be bamboo, and bamboo is also usually fairly cost effective when it comes to needles. It is very bendy and springy, however, so it would be probably pretty easy to break them. I haven't broken a needle yet, but I've heard of people doing so. And then, of course, when you're working this, a lot of people freak out. It's a long needle, it's tiny stitches, it's a little needle. But the same thing applies. You only work on one side with one skein, with one needle, and one stitch, generally speaking, at a time, so there's no need to freak out. It's not hard when you think about what you're doing and you take your time. So I don't ascribe to the idea that you must be X amount of experience to try sock knitting. I'm an adventurous knitter, but you can certainly try sock knitting whenever you want. If you can knit and you can purl, you can make socks. You just need to take your time. Now, the needles that I'm using happen to come in two other colors, denim and umber, which is a blue and then a brown, as well as coming in shorter sizes, which is about 3 inches. I prefer longer needle tips myself, and that's what I would suggest for somebody who's starting out. It's easier to work with, and as you're getting the muscle memory down of where you hold your hands and how you hold your hands, having a little more space to play with is just easier. And like I said, don't be alarmed by the needle size. It does get easier, and as you work with smaller needles and needles smaller than what you start off with, you'll find that working with the larger sizes is even easier. So for this demo, I took the time to rewind these 2 cakes so they're nice and neat, so you can see what they look like. I will be using my US2, which is a 2.75 millimeter, with the Nicole Studios samplers fingering, which is considered sock yarn. That is the weight, and I've already checked the amount, so I knew I needed 2, and this does have nylon in it. You can certainly make socks without nylon, but it's very helpful if there's some kind of nylon or polyamide in it. And if you want to know more about polyamide, see my first video. I have a link to an article about it. So we're going to be using Judy's Magic Cast On. You want a good amount of slack in your tail because you'll be using the slack up as well as the working yarn. And this is similar to the long tail cast on, which I'll make a video about in the future. And then I'll link it here as well as posting it for everyone to see. When you start socks, you're not using a terribly large amount of stitches, but if you underestimate the slack, it means you'll have to start over. But because you're starting at the toe, you will very quickly know when you've run out of yarn, and all you have to do is slide the stitches off the needle. A final note is, well, not a final note. Well, when wrapping yarn about the needles, you will always wrap from the bottom up with the opposite yarn. So the top needle will go with the bottom strand, the bottom strand will go with the bottom needle will go with the top strand. I'll remind you of this and show you what I mean in the demonstration. And as with all cast-ons, try not to work the stitches too tightly, as it will make working the first round more difficult. And then as a bonus, if you're on Patreon and you scroll down, you'll be able to see what it looks like past your first round into the toe. And I'll pause it so that you can see what it looks like after your first round is done, in a picture right below too. So here we go. And like I said, all you have to do is take your time. So you're going to line up your needles, have them parallel. Make sure they're not crossing like this, because that'll make it harder for you to get the stitches on. I'm going to go ahead and move these yarns off. I'm going to extend some yarn, make sure that I don't have any knots. And here we go. So as you can see, I'm slipping the yarn between the needles. And I can tell you right now, this is not enough slack. You will need at least twice this. We're just going to cast on 10 stitches, but you want to make sure you have enough. So I like to hold my working yarn, and the working yarn is the part that's attached to the ball, and then put that across, tension across my finger, and then tension the other one across my thumb. And so both of the yarns are underneath my three fingers that are closed, and we'll start the wrapping. So as you can see, this is the top yarn, so this is going to go to the bottom needle, and then the top gets the bottom, and you just keep going. Is if you run out of space, all you have to do is slide the stitches, and again, make sure you're not working too tightly, because that will make moving the stitches a lot more difficult. And I will count and count and count to make sure that I've got the right stitches, and I suggest that you do the same. Okay, so now this is the first cast on, and because I'm going to be adding more stitches, and I'm going to slide this over, I'm going to make a tiny loose knot here, which I will undo when I go to work those stitches. So there you go. We've got the stitches on the needle. Now I'm going to continue with the second socks cast on, drawing some yarn off of it. And I didn't measure, but I know that, put it between the needles. I know that about this much right here is not enough, so we're going to go ahead and pull more. And again, we're going to tension it between my forefinger and thumb, and then under my 3 remaining fingers. And you put 2 stitches on there. We've got 3. I got 5 now. Okay, so again, I'm going to make sure that I have the proper amount of stitches. Okay, so I've got 10 stitches on each needle, and I'm starting with that number. It's a good even number that's easy to work with, and I also know that I generally start with that amount. Anyway, so now we're ready to work. Now, when you see the magic loop, you see that this is the top needle and this is the bottom needle, and you're always going to be working from the top onto the bottom. Now, as you noticed earlier, I knotted this tail for my first set. I'll go ahead and move those down out of the way. Because I'm about to work these stitches, I'm not going to worry about that. What I am going to do is pull the working yarn back and pull that tail over it across this way, okay? And I will hold this tail here, tension, because I'm a picker, not a thrower, and go ahead and take this and start knitting. And I'll go ahead and knit this first round for you so you can just see I'm holding my, split the yarn, so I'll start that again. I'm holding the tail, and after I've worked a few stitches, I'll let the tail fall down because I won't need to worry about it catching. And while I am accomplished and I know what I'm doing and I'm confident about my knitting ability, I don't rush my cast on. The same amount of stitches, no matter how fast or slow that you go. So what I have done is I've worked my top half of my sock, and the bottom half is remaining unworked. I'm going to slide these over, and I'm going to work the top half of the other sock. Now remember, I said I knotted this, so I'm going to pull that knot out. Oh goodness. And I'm definitely going to take this and cross the tail over the working yarn again. Hold the working yarn, and then hold this tail out of the way. And we're going to knit across this row as well, same way. And there we go. We've worked all of the top stitches, right? And so you see those at the top of the socks. Now, to continue working and go around, we will turn the needle this way. And as you notice, this one stays on this side and this one stays on the other side. And I'm going to move these out of the way because we're not going to get to those yet. Going to slide this top needle so that we can work these stitches across and off of this onto the bottom needle. Because you're at a join, you want to make sure that you pull this first stitch a little tighter, just like you'll do the same thing when you start the row or the next round, because sometimes there will be gaps. So as before, we will pull this bottom needle, and then I'll knit across. And there we go. We've worked all the stitches for one sock. I'm going to move those out of the way and finish this. And you will have completed your first round around. Again, make sure you pull this first stitch a little tighter so that you don't have any gaps on the side of your sock. Knitting across. And there you go, all done with both sides. And your socks are now started. This will be the toe part that wraps around at the edge instead of you having a seam at the edge of your toe. And you'll just continue thus. A lot of toes have increases either every other row or in the first few rows, depending on the type of toe that you would like to have. And then you move on to the foot of the sock and follow your pattern. So I hope this was helpful and made sense to you. Stay tuned for part 3, which I will be doing this method with a single skein. So I will show you how to work from one skein from the inside and the outside, which is handy when you have 100-gram or a 400-yard or more ball. All right, enjoy. Happy knitting.